His own website shows only 3 meetings with provincial counterparts, and that was all in 2011. God only knows what he's been doing in 2012. He's been ripping off the taxpayers, that's what he's been doing, and by not doing his job. Will the minister admit to not doing his job and resign immediately?
Sometimes I just can't believe how rude and how bullish these people can be.
Well, that was the exchange in the House of Commons between Liberal MP Scott Andrews and Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Peter Panashiwe. Pretty heated stuff. Okay, let's bring in the MPs to talk about that. You know them, of course. Elizabeth May is the leader of the Green Party. Dan Harris of Scarborough is the NDP MP. Michelle Rempel, Calgary's finest Conservative MP. Yeah, now you're in trouble. Maybe a guy in Calgary's southeast. I don't know. But anyway, I want to talk about Peter Panashiwe. He's under the gun not only for election spending concerns, but also the fact that 80% of his travel budget seems to have been used in Labrador and Newfoundland. I guess the concern is there that he doesn't get out much, and he is the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister. What's your take on this, Elizabeth?
I don't think any of the ministers in Mr. Harper's cabinet perform any real function. I mean, the Intergovernmental Affairs Minister who really stood on principle was Michael Chong, who resigned when Stephen Harper decided to put forward the motion that Quebecers are a nation without actually running it by his minister. So I think I'm very conflicted about it. I'm going to confess this publicly. I've admired Peter Panashiwe for years from his leadership as a young man opposing the NATO low flights over Innu territory. He was doing civil disobedience on the runways. So I find myself thinking, here's a really good person in a bad spot. I think he ought to, the amount of money that was spent over his campaign limits is egregious. But I think going after him day after day, I think there's a proportionality here that's missing. Intergovernmental Affairs Minister, what should he be doing? Well, he probably should be actually running his own department, but that's not going to happen under this government.
Dan, Liberals are calling for his resignation. NDP have hinted at that too. Should he resign, and if so, why? It's not over this flying thing, it's over his election expenses.
Well, at this point, it's over his competency with the file. I mean, the NDP in the last several days has asked some very simple and basic questions of the minister with regards to his portfolio. And I mean, Robert Chisholm yesterday and today asked a simple question if he's going to the First Minister's meeting in Halifax or not, and the minister couldn't even answer that question.
Yeah, he does seem pretty tightly scripted and very nervous on his feet, but that's not grounds to get rid of him, of course. What's the Conservative view on Peter Panashiwe, Michelle? I'm sure you have a clear one.
Well, first of all, I think it's completely unfair to say that our government does not have a good working relationship with the provinces. I think that that's something that we've actually can take pride in. We've been working quite closely with our provincial counterparts in a variety of different files, on a variety of different topics, as we've heard in question period over the last 6 months. It's very clear. And, Minister Panashiwe has worked hard. He's spoken to that in question period over the last couple of days, and I'm sure he's looking forward to continuing that track record of good progress.
He should get out a little bit more. He hasn't been west of Ontario once. Only once.
Only once.
I have to disagree. First of all, there's other ways of communicating with your provincial counterparts. And second of all, if you talk to any of us on the panel here, yes, we travel back and forth to our riding. Why? Because we have a responsibility to our constituents. So I find it somewhat disingenuous to, harass a member of parliament for spending travel expenses going to his riding.
But you're a parliamentary secretary. You go around the country and talk about the environment.
Well, I also spend a good chunk of my time in my riding because that's a primary function of a member of parliament. You represent a group of constituents.
Yeah. Okay. And constituents, though, are, with respect to ministers, they're definitely very lenient in terms of understanding that the minister has responsibilities to go elsewhere. And as you just mentioned, Minister Panashiwe has only been west of Ontario once. 80% of the travel has been back to his riding, to his province. And I mean, that's certainly not any kind of balance with respect to an intergovernmental affairs minister.
Yeah, but let's look at the cabinet overall under Stephen Harper is bloated. There's a lot of people there who are, no offense, Michelle, there's a lot of parliamentary secretaries, there's lots of ministers of state so it's a large cabinet, and I don't think that we really know what a lot of people are doing in terms of their responsibilities because, as I said, Mr. Harper makes the decisions, and his cabinet ministers currently seem to perform the function of spokespersons for that particular area of government policy as opposed to actually running their department.
I'll just close on this.
Okay.
Earlier this year, the NDP had to defend the fact that their leader was basically putting divisive Eastern-Western policy on the table with regards to the oil sands, and he had never visited it. So, you know, I do support members of Parliament going to their ridings and learning about their constituent issues.
Okay, let's move along. There is another one. This drives me crazy. Okay, the last 9 days, I counted them up, member statements. There have been 17 statements just in the last 9 days about the carbon tax. The NDP dreaded $21 billion carbon tax. And the irony thing happened this week when Peter Van Loan stood up in the House and complained that they were being called a liar and a fibber and a whole bunch of other things because they said the NDP has this carbon tax, which is a lie. There is no NDP carbon tax.
Exactly.
What's going on? Is it against the rules to say you're lying when you're lying in the House of Commons? And what should be done about it?
I put a point of order to the Speaker some weeks ago because I felt that they're called Standing Order 31 statements. It's an innovation only in the last couple of decades that a member gets to stand up and say something for a minute every now, you know, at the beginning of between you know, the first 15 minutes before question period. They're not supposed to be used, as they're increasingly used, as talking point strategies, obviously repeating something that isn't true. The frustrating thing for me as a climate activist and as the only leader of the only party that actually believes that a revenue neutral carbon tax makes sense is that the conversation isn't a conversation. It's you want one, no you don't. It's very clear the NDP platform calls for a cap and trade program. And it's very clear that in the past the Conservatives called for the same thing. Why everybody's running from a plan that would make sense, which happens to be called a carbon tax, is frustrating.
I'll get to that in a second, but I want to salute one thing about Michelle Rempel here. She's never called it a carbon tax. You just say there's a $21 billion revenue grab based on carbon pricing.
You stole my thunder. I was going to congratulate
go ahead.
Michelle. I was going to congratulate Michelle on the fact that even during her SO31, she didn't say carbon tax, and she's talked about, and at least in fairness, that she thinks that our plan is going to raise prices on everything, but without saying carbon tax.
See, everyone likes it.
Today I had an SO31,
now.
and I spoke about Stephen Lewis, who is a former MPP in my riding, because lots of people in my riding still care a lot about Stephen. So I made a statement about my riding. Yesterday there was a fabulous statement on the 4-H club that one of the Conservatives members was making, and then he went and sullied it by talking about this carbon tax.
I was going to make it harder for young 4-H'ers, so that was a low point.
I guess we've said nice things about you. You don't have to say anything more. But can I ask you a different question, though? If the Obama...
I have to respond to that.
Go ahead.
You know, here's the thing. First of all, with regard to our climate change policy, our government has a really strong track record of working towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I've said this to you on your show numerous times. We've actually seen a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions under our government's tenure. They're actually stabilizing. We've got a sector-by-sector approach. One of the first countries to regulate emissions from coal-fired plants. It's a great accomplishment. We're also doing that while promoting growth in our economy, so not doing things that would competitively disadvantage our economy. That's the point here. You know, the NDP's platform, what they proposed in there would hurt consumers, would hurt businesses, and would hurt manufacturing. So it is important to highlight that because it's in stark contrast for what our government stands
actually,
for.
the greenhouse gases have not gone down under this government, and the Environment Canada report
Log on
says
to
they would go.
environmentcanada.ca.
But you go to the Environment Canada report. Well, as most an academic review of that has found it to be. You know, it's a fraudulent document. But when you look at it, it says by 2020 they will have gone down too. And they pick a tonnage that's above where we are now. So
she's criticizing Environment Canada scientists for doing their
job.
No,
I'm not criticizing Environment Canada science. I'm criticizing the fact this government has corrupted the process.
Absolutely.
We would love to hear directly from Environment Canada scientists on this issue,
An
but
emissions trends report
the government's not letting
scientists
scientists speak without chaperones.
It was produced to a political end, which shows how much the system has become corrupt.
I was going to ask you all about the cap and trade. If it goes in the States, what would happen in Canada? But we'll have to do that another time. We're completely off the clock. Elizabeth, Dan Harris, and Michelle